Well, hello and welcome to Extra Minutes, the 60 Minutes podcast. I'm Adam Hegarty and I'm joined by our resident US politics expert, Amelia Adams. Amelia,
the story that keeps on giving.
Exactly right. I've lost count of the amount of Donald Trump stories you've done. But this one is an interesting one, looking at the friendship between Donald Trump and the late Jeffrey Epstein. I guess a lot of people hear about the Epstein Files, don't they, and may not really be across what they are.
Well, this is why it's caused so much trouble for Donald Trump over the years, but particularly in the last few weeks. It's just blown up for him. It's kind of consuming Washington, D.C. and making global headlines. The files themselves are pretty elusive. I mean, we know there are files on the case of Jeffrey Epstein. We know he trafficked and sexually abused hundreds, if not 1,000, I've been told, girls and young women. Just
on that, what a number.
Aided by, the scale of it is honestly horrific. Aided and abetted by his co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell, who is in jail. We've seen some of these documents. It's about 300 gigs of data, physical evidence of these vile crimes. Flight logs, who went on Jeffrey Epstein's private plane, all those sorts of things. What's so alluring about them is that they haven't been made public.
Yeah, despite the calls.
Despite, Donald Trump and his administration repeatedly promising to release them. And I guess like anything, when there's a little bit of an unknown, it does spark those conspiracy theories. And that's really what has happened around Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, and I mean, Donald Trump himself, he's made a political career out of conspiracy theories, hasn't he? It's quite fascinating that the tables have been turned on him here.
Well, indeed. I mean, conspiracy theorist in chief, as one of our political analysts
that's a good phrase.
Put to me. He's leaned into that over the years. Where was Barack Obama born? QAnon, name anything. He sort of throws these things out. And there is, a real sort of support base there in the Make America Great Again network that latches onto them. The Jeffrey Epstein case, I think, has been particularly impactful because it promised to expose, the so-called Washington elites. We know Bill Clinton's name's thrown around, Bill Gates. It promised to name and shame these wealthy, everything that the MAGA faithful, the working class Americans sort of think their time is up. They're not going to get away with this anymore. That's the promise of releasing the Epstein Files. And, Donald Trump really has lent into it. He made it a promise of his 2024. I mean, I can remember in his first presidency, it was really probably after Epstein died by suicide in jail, which sparked a whole lot of conspiracies.
The initial conspiracy theory, exactly.
Yeah, and that was during Trump's first presidency. And it was that moment, I guess, that he latched onto those conspiracies and the thought that perhaps, was it a murder? Was it a cover-up of some sort so that Epstein's client list, so-called again, wouldn't be released? And since then, he's constantly sort of thrown it out there to the point where at the start of this year, his own Attorney General, his own staff administration were constantly saying, this is happening, we're going to release them. And then suddenly, at some point last month, they went, actually, we're not. There's nothing to see here.
Well, funny
which
that.
is a surefire way to really upset your public.
So you're absolutely right. He was this hero of the whole Drain the Swamp and that MAGA movement, obviously, wasn't he? But now he's in the crosshairs for the exact same reason. I mean, what do we know about the Epstein Files in terms of whether or not his name does pop up on it? Obviously, that's the insinuation and why he's covering it up.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of at the heart of the story too is the friendship that they had, because we know they were friends. Yeah. And that's not a secret. I mean, they were pictured together, New York, parties at Mar-a-Lago, his Florida residence. Back in the 90s, you had this, Epstein's the billionaire financier, and Donald Trump back then was a property developer, man about town. Trump's on the record talking about how Epstein loved women, particularly young ones. Yeah. Jeffrey Epstein was invited to Donald Trump's wedding, his second wedding. So there's no disputing the fact they were friends. I think where the problem comes in for Trump is that as soon as Epstein was exposed to be this, monster, this pedophile, Donald Trump, understandably, started distancing himself from him.
Exactly.
And even recently, I didn't talk to him for years. He's never said we weren't friends, but he certainly said, I think he was a creep and he was a terrible guy.
Exactly. Spot on, Mr. President. But that's what
And,
fascinates me about this, Amelia, where even just the relationship that's already known between the
Yes.
pair. You'd think that would have damaged his presidency and his popularity in itself.
Yeah.
But then just him going back on this big groundswell of conspiracy theories and peddling what he peddles, and it's very interesting that is what's then attached this negatively to him.
It's a mess of his own making. It absolutely is. Because we know his name is in the files. We know that. We've known that for some time. And the White House just a couple of weeks ago said the president was briefed on the fact that his name is in those files several times in May. So a couple of months ago. What we don't know is in what capacity. Is it just Donald Trump was on Jeffrey Epstein's plane on this date and this date? It could be. There's no suggestion of anything inappropriate. We have no idea what capacity he's in the files, and that's what makes it so interesting that he is backed off from releasing them. And, we speak to in our story Maria Farmer, who was a victim of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell 30 years ago. She went to the FBI. Now, she saw Donald Trump come into Jeffrey Epstein's offices and had a pretty disturbing encounter, just a bit weird and unusual, which Donald Trump disputes, I should say. Says he was never there. So this is 1995. She then went on to work for Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein to be sexually abused by them both. She reported this child trafficking sex ring to the FBI in the mid-1990s. And when she reported them, she also reported Donald Trump. She said, she's told us she mentioned a lot of their associates.
By name.
And one of them, she said, was this businessman, he was kind of like I think she described him as a used car salesman, like a cheesy businessman about town in New York.
Adding up, isn't it?
And the FBI said, Donald Trump.
Wow.
So she mentioned his association with them in 96. Now, the FBI did nothing. They didn't follow up. They didn't start investigating Jeffrey Epstein until 10 years later, in 2006, when the Palm Beach authorities were onto the case, arrested him, which did lead to him getting his sweetheart deal and eventually going to jail. But Marie's really interesting because I think it does give us the first or the clearest account yet of how these two men interacted. And she goes, Jeffrey said, he's my best friend.
Best friend.
Donald Trump is my best friend. Wow. So it sort of grates with Trump going, nothing to see here. Yeah, he was a creep. Don't ask me any questions.
Yeah.
Especially when we know his names are in the file. And I think it's a real problem for his loyal supporters because they've followed this case. Many of them, they love a conspiracy, especially if it's going to hand over all the elites.
Yeah.
And now they're going, well, hang on. Are you involved, President? Is that why you've backed off your promise?
Well, could you imagine if one of his political opponents had this dirt on him?
This is it.
Everything that's pointing to Donald Trump, they would absolutely tear strips off that person, as would Donald Trump.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary.
No, you're right. So it really is a story that kind of has everything for this, political storm that it's caused. And what's been fascinating, I think, is that he can't get away from it. I mean, this is a man who shakes off political scandals like almost daily.
Or impeachments.
Yeah,
I mean, felony charges.
What has he not survived? To your point, he's been impeached twice, 34 felony charges. Whatever his involvement was, he was involved in Jan 6, and he was re-elected. So he's pretty good at finding his way out of a scandal. For some reason, he just cannot. He's put himself in a really tricky position with this, and it's not going away because people just want the answers. They either want to know what is in the files or, give a solid reason as to why you're not releasing them, which to my understanding from lawyers is that there are a lot of child victims and photographs and evidence, pretty vile evidence of that nature in those files. So you don't release those things to protect those people. But I think it's also fair to assume that you might be protecting predators or your rich and famous friends. Where there's like an information hole is where people put their own theories, right?
Exactly right. I mean, it raises the really obvious question, does he recover from this? What's the implications for Donald Trump? You've covered a lot of those things that you mentioned, the felony charges, impeachment, whatever it might be. It's a laundry list.
Yes.
But it's this that might be his undoing.
Well,
where do you see it go from here?
It's a tricky one, and I hate to speculate because I've said publicly in the past that he could never be re-elected after January 6th. So
anything
that's
could happen
for
with
me.
this man.
But I'm not the only one. I think, a lot of people would have thought that he couldn't recover from so many of those things.
Yeah.
And you're right, he clearly has. He's re-elected. I think this it's clearly damaged him. I know there are some Republicans in Congress who are saying this could hurt him in the midterm elections. Yeah. So that's a year away, and who he's throwing his support behind, whether his supporters will turn against the Republican Party or whether this is a Donald Trump problem, because, as you know, those two things are not always aligned.
In tune, yeah.
If I had to make a bet based on what he has done in the last few years, I would say this is not the thing that's going to bring him down, because nothing seems to.
Teflon Trump.
Yeah, Teflon Trump. But it has definitely wounded him. His supporters are questioning what he's telling them, and I think that's always been at the key of the MAGA movement, is that whatever he says, even though sometimes it sounds ridiculous and often completely unbelievable, and often it's just blatantly untrue, his supporters believe him.
It's this blind loyalty.
It is, and at this point, a lot of them are going, well, I don't know that that's true.
You've covered a few of those MAGA rallies in your time. Few is probably an understatement.
So passionate.
Yeah, and extraordinarily loyal.
Yeah.
Has this surprised you with
It
your
has.
Experience?
Yeah, it has, because for me, and I covered the when Jeffrey Epstein died, I was actually in our London bureau. Yeah. And then you had, Prince Andrew giving his train crash interview to the BBC. I mean, I covered that. I covered the story back then, and then I covered it when I was in America. It just bubbles along and along. It's sort of, it's the story that won't go away, because the scale of it is so horrific. Ghislaine Maxwell is the only person who's been held accountable. Jeffrey Epstein obviously is dead. His secrets are dead with him. She's been jailed for 20 years. But, a lot of the victims are making the point now, there were other people involved. Lots of women have said, I was handed from woman to woman before I got to Ghislaine, before I got to Jeffrey Epstein. Surely their names are in the files. Why can't they be released? So this is the part of the problem, I think, that the Justice Department has been so definitive in saying there's no basis to prosecute anyone else. And victims are saying, how is that possible? How can there not be, other names to follow up on?
Indeed. Look, watch this space. I imagine a few more stories out of you, Amelia, on this case going forward.
And I think the interesting thing is now what happens with Ghislaine Maxwell, because it's given her this fresh power. I mean, Donald Trump has been under so much pressure to act that he sent his authorities to re-interview her. She's been moved to a minimum security prison. She's now kind of playing this game where she's been asked to testify before Congress. And she said, only if I get, immunity or some sort of protection from the president. And she's had a long time to give answers and to give names. So again, there's the theories popping up. Well, is she protecting the president? Does he hope that she will clear him? And because maybe he's done nothing wrong except be friends with this guy before he knew what a monster he is. That could well be the case. But it is the uncertainty, I think, that is driving this story. And unfortunately, Donald Trump, as usual, can't help himself. He keeps talking about it. And what's interesting, politically, is he lands in, Europe for meetings on EU trade deals or whatever it is. Like, these are important geopolitical trips and bilaterals and whatnot. And the first thing he's asked, or the first thing he talks about, is Jeffrey Epstein.
Sure, he loves that.
So it is not going away.
And won't go away for a very, very long time. Amelia, thank you. You
Thanks,
can, of course, catch your story on the 60 Minutes YouTube channel, as well as 9 Now.